Good morning and welcome to my presentation of my functional behavior assessment. I conducted this as part of the requirements for Rehab 535. Please excuse my scratchy voice, I'm just getting over the flu. And my name is Holly Berry Wesley. John was referred to us because of some behavioral concerns. The main behavior of concern was leaving the designated area, which was defined as walking out of the door of the activity room without staff permission. Some management strategies that had been tried in the past were trying to engage John in an activity before he leaves the room, or afterward we would try planned ignoring of the behavior, which meant that while keeping John in sight to ensure his safety, minimal attention was given to the wandering behavior. In addition to this, I also did some indirect assessments. I started with a record review. Upon reviewing the records, I learned that John was a special education high school graduate who lives with his family. I interviewed his sister, who he does live with, and I learned that John is for the most part happy with his daily schedule, and that he seems to engage in this target behavior more after lunch at day treatment and when presented with doing a task that he does not really enjoy. John is nonverbal, but he has fair receptive language, meaning that he can follow one-stage directions. John's sister thinks that he does the leaving the designated area because he thinks that it's time to go home, or he is looking for desired items or people. However, he does not usually receive these items or people when he leaves the room. According to John's sister, he enjoys meal times, helping out around the house and the classroom, walking in the woods, watching movies, especially Harry Potter, and spending time with his family. He seems to have more trouble when he has to do pre-vocational tasks in unstructured time. I also did the QABF in the FAST, and I interviewed John's sister for this as well. When I did the FAST, I found out that attention and escape were both the highest scores, suggesting that the function of this behavior could be to receive attention or escape. When I did the QABF, it suggested that the function of the behavior would be non-social, but the second highest was escape. Now, these measures are only so reliable. They're not the most reliable measures, so you do want to take all this with a grain of salt and do further analysis. However, I decided that it looks like escape could be a possible function of this behavior. When you just survey these few assessments, it does seem to be some disagreement as to the function of the target behavior. The interview with his sister seems to suggest that he leaves the area simply to escape demands. However, the FAST would also suggest that he can get attention this way. The QABF, on the other hand, would suggest that the wandering the halls is in itself reinforcing to John, and that he gets non-social reinforcement for the activity. And the QABF also suggests that John may be engaging in this behavior to gain access to preferred people or items. I also did some anecdotal observations as part of the direct assessment portion. So when I did my antecedent assessment of 6 behavior occurrences, 33% were preceded by finishing up with a task, or 67 were preceded by a request to begin working. So this does suggest that the behavior can function as a way to escape demands. 100% of the time the behaviors began in the activity room. Then I also did a consequences observation. For the 6 observed behaviors, verbal redirection was provided most often. 100% of the time. 17% of the time, the consequences involved gaining access to tangibles when a staff member followed him out and got the television. Over the 3 days of measurement, 16 events were recorded with a total of 16 individual behavioral occurrences. The average number of events per day was 5.3, with an average duration of 3.7 minutes. So if you look at the different antecedent events, if you look at the antecedent events, presence of tasks or demands was the most reported as to coming right before he left the designated area. 63% of the time, he had a demand or a task that he had to do, and then he left the designated area. Second, 25% of the time, transitions were followed by him leaving the designated area. And last but not least, leisure activities were 19%. So it would seem that it could function as a form of escape. Now we're going to look at consequences. The most common consequence was verbal redirection, which happened 100% of the time, followed by escape from demand, which was 69% of the time, and escape from task 25% of the time. And preferred item activity was 6.25. John was returned to the room 100% of the time. If you look at the duration, measures indicate that this happened 5.3 times a day, with an average duration of 20 minutes a day, and an overall average of 3.75 minutes per event. I did a scatter plot analysis to try to determine if there was a certain time or pattern to John leaving the room, but I did not find one. Leaving the designated area resulted in escape from tasks 100% of the time. So he didn't get a lot of attention, access, anything like that. When I was doing this particular analysis over this data, escape was the only consequence he received. I also did a contingent-based analysis, and I looked at some access to different things, access to tangibles. When I did the conditional probability, access to tangibles was not more likely to occur contingent on target behavior or as the result of another behavior, so I don't think that's the function. Sensory had a conditional probability of 0% following either target or non-target behaviors. Attention, the subject, according to my notes, was 100% more likely to receive attention as a consequence for other behavior as LDA. However, with escape, 100% of the time when he exhibited the target behavior, he left the room and got at least a short break. If you compare the two, he got a break 46% of the time after other behaviors. It would seem that escape is a possible function. In order to try to find out if it truly is for escape, the function is truly escape, I did an antecedent assessment where I presented John with no task, easy task, medium task, hard task with help, and hard task. He, no matter what the task was, at some point he did give up and walk out of the room almost all the time. In fact, if you look at this across the board, it seems that giving him a task to do is more likely to evoke the behavior. He is very likely to leave the designated area before completing any task. So this could either mean that he's trying to escape the task or trying to escape to something he finds more reinforcing. Because often we like to do interventions and we use reinforcers, Part of this assignment was to do a preference assessment to identify possible reinforcers. I did a multiple stimuli without replacement, and I found out that bananas were his high preference item, chosen 67% of the time, and water was his low preference item, chosen 33% of the time. When I did a reinforcer assessment to make sure that the chosen items actually had a reinforcement effect, I found out that the bananas did indeed have a higher reinforcing effect than baseline or water. He did quite a few arm raises, 2.5 through 3.5 a minute. Part of, sometimes you can't do a full functional analysis for different reasons. So one of the things you can do instead is a functional analysis preference assessment. This procedure is done as an alternative to an experimental functional analysis, and you have your subject make a choice between two conditions, basically pairing up attention, escape, intangibles in different combinations. According to this, access to tangibles could be one of the functions underlying John's leaving of the designated area, with John choosing the conditions involving access to tangibles 80% of the time, compared to 50% of the time for escape and attention. However, this is inconsistent with the rest of the FBA, which does seem to indicate escape as being the function. So perhaps John did not view being alone as true escape. My hypothesis statements, again, I think that this behavior is maintained by escape and tangibles. Escape, when asked to complete a non-preferred task, John is likely to engage in inappropriate behavior because in the past, similar behavior has resulted in the removal or delay of the demand to complete the task. Tangibles, when given a non-preferred task to complete, John is likely to engage in inappropriate behavior because in the past, similar behavior has resulted in gaining access to a preferred person or item. Throughout the FBA process, escape and tangibles were possible functions. The results obtained across the assessments would seem to support that the behavior is maintained by escape and possibly access to tangibles. In the future, I would recommend implementing an intervention that teaches John demand for breaks in preferred items. Any questions? Thank you so much, and have a great day.